Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. Within Christianity, we have many disputes about what is right and what is wrong. And sometimes the reason we have disputes is because we overstate God's commands. Now let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Exodus 30 tells us that God commanded Aaron and the priests to wash themselves before they enter the tent of meeting and before they approach the altar. And so there was a clear command to wash themselves. But then in Mark 7, we see that by the time of Christ, the Jews had taken that simple command and exaggerated it into a long list of regulations that went way beyond what the Bible actually said. Now, Jesus criticized the scribes and Pharisees for forcing the Jews to follow that long list of tradition. And so we see that that's a warning for us not to do the same thing and not to overstate what the Bible actually says. And one of the areas that we have a tendency to overstate God's commands is in the area of alcohol, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's take a look at this in Exodus 30. The Israelites are at Mount Sinai, and God is giving them the Mosaic law. In these verses, God told them to construct a laver for the priest to wash. So let's start reading at verse 17. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "You shall also make a laver of bronze with its base of bronze for washing, and you shall put it between the tent of meeting and the altar, and you shall put water in it." So notice the word laver. They were told to make a laver. Notice the word water. They were supposed to put water in it. And then notice the word washing. The purpose of the laver was so that the priests could wash themselves before serving. Verse 19. Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet from it. When they enter the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water so that they will not die, or when they approach the altar to minister by offering up in smoke a fire sacrifice to Yahweh. So we see they were supposed to wash their hands and feet, and they were supposed to do that before they entered the tent of meeting. Notice the word enter. And then also before they approached the altar, they were supposed to wash their hands and feet. And there was a warning here that there were some severe consequences if they did not wash. There was a possibility they could die. But overall, we see it was a simple command. They had to wash their hands and feet before they entered the tent of meeting and before they approached the altar. Verse 21. So they shall wash their hands and their feet so that they will not die, and it shall be a perpetual statute for them, for Aaron and his descendants throughout their generations. And then notice the word perpetual. This is something that was supposed to be done generation after generation. Now let's take a look at Mark 7 and see what this looked like by the time of Christ. Let's start reading at verse 1. The Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around Jesus when they had come from Jerusalem and had seen that some of his disciples were eating their bread with impure hands, that is, unwashed. So notice the word unwashed. The scribes and Pharisees noticed that some of Jesus' disciples did not wash their hands before they ate, and that was a violation of their tradition, as we see in verse 3. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves. And there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. Now notice the word carefully. The Jews did not merely wash, they were very careful how they washed. They had a very specific process for washing. And notice that all of this was part of their tradition. All this washing that they did not come from the actual scriptures. It was part of their tradition. Also, when they came from the marketplace, they would wash. And Jesus specifically mentioned that there were many other things that they did in the area of washing. And then we see listed the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. And so again, we see that the Jews had taken a very simple command about washing hands and feet before entering the tent of meeting and had turned it into a long list of regulations that went way beyond what the scripture actually required. Verse 5. The Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands?" So notice the word why. The scribes and Pharisees asked Jesus why they were violating their tradition. Verse 6, Jesus said to them, "Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me.'" So notice Jesus started talking right away about the heart. Jesus pointed out that yes, the scribes and Pharisees had all these traditions and commands and regulations they followed, but Jesus pointed out their heart really was not following God. Verse 7, "But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men." Now this is a very important line here, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. And this really got to the heart of the issue. The scribes and the Pharisees took all of these teachings and commands that were made by men, and they taught them as if they were scripture. But they weren't. They actually went way beyond what the scripture required. And then we see again, Jesus pointed out that all of this was part of their tradition of men, and Jesus pointed out that they were so obsessed with the tradition of men that they actually neglected God's commandments. They neglected what God actually told them to do. So again, within Christianity, we have many disputes about what is right and what is wrong, and part of the problem is sometimes we overstate God's commandments. And we see in these passages an example of this. In Exodus 30, we see that yes, indeed, God did require the priests to wash themselves before they enter the tent of meeting and before they approach the altar, but it was a very simple command of washing their hands and feet. But then in Mark 7, you see that by the time of Christ, the Jews had taken that simple command and turned it into a long list of regulations that went way beyond what Scripture actually required. And we see in Mark 7 that Jesus criticized the scribes and Pharisees for that. He pointed out they were wrong. And so that's a warning to us. It's an example to us that we should not do the same thing with Scripture. We should not overstate God's commandments. Now, what this looks like in our lives, one example is alcohol. There are many Christians who believe it's wrong to drink any alcohol whatsoever, and they teach that it's wrong to drink alcohol. But the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible clearly prohibits drunkenness, but nowhere does the Bible tell us that it's wrong to drink altogether. And so we as Christians need to be very careful with this. Obviously in our society with drunk driving, drinking alcohol is something we have to be very careful about, but we also need to be careful that we don't overstate God's commands, and God did not prohibit us from drinking alcohol altogether, but He did prohibit us from getting drunk, and we need to be clear about that. If you haven't joined my email list yet, please do so. First of all, it is free. By signing up, you get immediate access to all my free content. It will be delivered right to your email inbox. This is the best way to make sure you don't miss out on any of my free content. In order to sign up, go to BibleMountain.com, click on follow. There will be a place there to enter your email address. Once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.